A former Google executive is opening about his time with the company in an op-ed published in Medium. Ross LaJeunesse, who once served as Google head of international relations, says that Google once operated under a philosophy of do no evil. But when they needed to double down on a commitment to human rights, they wrote, quote, decided to chase bigger profits and an even higher stock price.
Ross LaJeunesse joins us now via Skype. He is also currently running to represent Maine in the United States Senate. Welcome to Rising, sir.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
absolutely. So Sagar and I both read your piece, found it very interesting. Just lay out for the audience what you wanted to communicate about your time at Google and how the company has changed.
Yeah, well, I first really wanted to let users and the public know that a once great company that had lived by ideals such as don't be evil, always do the right thing for the user, had changed before my very eyes during my 11 years at the company. And I felt it was important that people knew that because the company still uses the same marketing and the same PR to talk about itself the way that it once operated, but that things have changed inside the company.
Mm-hmm. And so, Ross, one of the things you highlighted specifically was about trying to create a division of human rights, specifically to talk about and with the relations of that company with China. So, talk about some of the pushback that you received within there, and really the culture that you saw that that was created in order to silence voices like yours.
Right. The idea behind a human rights program was that the company was growing so quickly that myself and the team that reported to me was no longer able to be in many of the conversations that were happening all across the company. The number of products certainly grew exponentially, and the number of employees grew exponentially. Various lines of business increased, such as cloud computing increasingly became a big source of revenue. And I was aware that not only was I not in the room for many of those conversations, I was deliberately sidelined from a lot of those conversations as I increasingly spoke out about the importance of human rights principles being a part of those conversations. So my answer was to establish some program, a formal human rights program that would help guide the company and serve as an institutionalized way of helping the company live by its ideals. I did this truly believing that this was in the best interests of the company, which was why it was so shocking when the retribution happened against me for doing this.
Mm-hmm. Well, and just talk about, in terms of the evolution of the company that you witnessed, just talk about China as one specific example and how Google related to the Chinese regime.
Absolutely. It's certainly one of the most clear examples of the culture change that happened. In late 2009, I was asked to lead our public policy team in Asia Pacific. So I flew out to Hong Kong and lived there for 3 years. And a big part of my job was to help guide the company's decision and execute our decision in 2010 to stop censoring search results in cooperation with the Chinese government. That was a moment I was incredibly proud to work at Google, and I was really proud of our decision. It was not the sort of decision that was unanimous at the company, however. There were many product leads and executives, business executives, who did not agree with our decision, but it was a decision based in values and in principles about doing the right thing and adhering to human rights and doing the right thing by our users. And it was about within a year, I would say, of that decision, that certain product teams started coming to me asking for my assistance in relaunching or entering the Chinese market. And depending on what the product was, I was fine to help them do that. But the Chinese government really had very little interest in cooperating with us. It was a few years later. I mean, some of the early product launches, we tried to launch a Maps product in China. We considered launching the Play Store, a version of the Play Store in China. And for each of these launches, I was very careful to explain to the product executives that in order to do that, we would have to cooperate with the Chinese government fully, not only in terms of censoring those products, but also in terms of, even more problematically, turning over user data to the Chinese government on demand. And that was, for me, a clear violation of human rights, knowing how the Chinese government operates, its attempts to violently suppress anyone who disagrees with the government and the party, for example. In 2017, the real aha moment, I'd say, happened for me when I learned of plans to launch Dragonfly, which was a censored version of search, which was a complete 180-degree change from our 2010 decision. And I did everything I could to get the company to realize that this would be a horrible mistake.
And you know, it's funny because you were right, which is that Sundar Pichai and the CEO found himself dragged before the United States Congress, and now Dragonfly is dead. So, I mean, I think this is an interesting point, Ross, which you might be able to highlight, which is that it's actually bad for quite a bit of these companies that they tried to chase so much of this business in China because, A, Chinese government was never really going to let them have a full hand and the free hand in the first place, and B, now U.S. regulators and the Department of Justice is taking quite a bit of look at this.
Well, that was always, I'm not a flamethrower. I certainly believe in human rights and that every company should adhere to human rights principles. I believe that, as a former executive and as an individual and as a human being. But I quickly realized that those arguments weren't getting traction in the company. So I pivoted to using arguments like the one you just described. I reminded the company of how much benefit we receive to our brand and in our relationships with policymakers as a result of our 2010 decision. Civil society, European policymakers, US policymakers, were unanimous in praising our decision to put principles ahead of profits.
Right.
And I reminded them that those very same individuals were going to excoriate us if we went back on that decision. And at the time, we were having incredible issues in the EU with various investigations and problems around antitrust and tax payments.
Well, and Ross, I think that principle over profit piece is so important because my big question here is, originally Google did, in your view, try to put principle over profit, but when a company becomes large, when it's a public corporation, when it's supposed to answer to its shareholders and shareholders alone, isn't this a sort of inevitable outcome that you will see play out in company after company after company, just based on the structure and the pressures and incentives of corporate America?
My argument is that is a very short-term view of increasing shareholder value. Right. Because if we had launched Dragonfly, you already saw what happened to Sundar. He was dragged before Congress, and that's what actually killed Dragonfly. If we had somehow launched it, what we saw with Sundar would have been replicated all throughout the EU. Every civil society organization that we partner with, every government official in Europe and in Western countries would have really gone on the warpath with us. That is not a way you build long-term company value for your shareholders, right? That's the way you get mired down in regulatory oversight, in hearings, and your executives get distracted from what they're supposed to be doing, which is launching great products for world users. So I use that argument.
Yeah.
Very short-term view of profits and what a company should be doing.
I think you're right about that. I would counter, though, that you shouldn't be justifying human rights just in the name of, well, this is really going to increase shareholder value. Right. But we also wanted to ask you, you're running for Senate in Maine.
I absolutely agree with you, Crystal. You shouldn't be doing that. But again,
I know that was the only argument to try to win the day.
That was argument number 2 for me. Yeah. Right.
I hear you.
But they'll say, Ross, you're not the one on the earnings call. So
yeah, there you go. Well, we also wanted to ask you, though, you're running for Senate in Maine. Just tell us a little bit about your campaign, the dynamics, and what you hope to do there.
Sure.
Thanks so much, Crystal. I am in a hotel room outside of Bangor right now. I'm on the road. I'm traveling up and down and across the state, meeting with voters. The way the reason I'm running is because Maine is really being left behind. We're 49th in the country in terms of economic growth. An issue very important to me. We still have huge parts of the state without high-speed internet or even mobile phone reception, which holds back our economy and our students from participating in the economy of the future, which is what we should be doing. The way that this Senate run is linked to my time at Google is that I see in both Google, many corporations in America, not all of them, but certainly in the US Senate and in Washington right now, it's an abuse of power. The people and the institutions who say they're looking out for us, who say they care about us and have our backs, are lying to us. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I look at Susan Collins, for example, one of the few things she's done in the past 2 years, despite this state, which is suffering as badly as it is economically, she voted for a $1.5 trillion tax cut. All those benefits went to big corporations and the wealthy. Corporations like Google, which saved $4 billion in 1 year alone. And it didn't use that money to invest in Maine. It didn't use that money to raise the hourly rate of its part-time workers. It bought back its own stock, and it gave huge bonuses to its executives.
Yeah.
And that's corruption. That is abuse of power. She's not representing the people of Maine anymore. She's representing her big corporate donors. And that's why I'm running to beat her.
Themes we talk about here a lot every day. Ross, great to have you. Thank you so much. Great piece and good luck on the run.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely.
Have a great day.
You too.
Of course. We'll have more Rising for you after this.